Hello, and a very warm welcome to all of our listeners joining us today on Healthy Kidneys After 60. I am Jane Pauley, and it is a privilege to spend this quiet hour with you. As we grow older, we often find ourselves whispering about the little aches, the strange numbness in our toes at night, or that heavy feeling in our legs after a short walk, often dismissing them as just part of the deal of aging. But today, we are going to look closer at what those signals might really mean. Joining me is a man who has spent his career translating the complex language of the human body into stories we can all understand, the Chief Medical Correspondent for CNN, and a renowned neurosurgeon, Dr. Sanjay Gupta. Sanjay, it is so good to have you here to help us listen to what our bodies are trying to tell us.
Thank you so much for having me, Jane. It is truly a pleasure to be here with you and your audience. You know, I spend a lot of time in the clinical setting, and if there is one thing I have learned from the thousands of patients I have sat with, it is that our bodies are incredibly communicative. They rarely go silent without a reason. Especially for those of us over 60, those small, nagging sensations in our feet or legs aren't always just old age knocking at the door. Often they are early whispers, letters sent from our circulatory system, asking for a little bit of attention before the whisper turns into a shout. I'm looking forward to diving into these stories with you today and hopefully offering some clarity and hope to everyone listening at home.
You know, Sanjay, I was talking to a friend the other day, a woman in her early 70s who is usually quite active, and she mentioned something that stuck with me. She said that lately when the sun goes down and she finally sits in her favorite armchair to read, her feet start to feel like they belong to someone else. There is this strange numbness, a tingling like ants marching under the skin, or sometimes just a heaviness that makes her legs feel like they are made of lead. She laughed it off, saying, "Well, Jane, I suppose this is just what happens when the odometer hits 70. But I saw a flicker of real concern in her eyes. Is it true? Are we just supposed to accept that our legs will become heavy and our feet will go numb as a mandatory tax on a long life? Or is there something more significant happening beneath the surface that we are choosing to ignore because we are afraid of the answer?"
That is such a poignant observation, Jane, and honestly, it's a conversation I have almost every single week in my practice. That tax on aging you mentioned is a very common myth, but the reality is much more nuanced. When we talk about numbness, tingling, or that heavy lead feeling in the lower extremities, we are often talking about the efficiency of our internal highway system, our circulation. Think of your circulatory system like a vast network of roads delivering essential supplies like oxygen and nutrients to every single cell in your body. When we are young, those roads are wide open and the traffic flows perfectly. But as the years go by, for various reasons, those roads can become narrow or congested. The feet and the lower legs are the furthest points from the heart, the very end of the delivery route. So if there's a slowdown in the system, those areas are the first to feel the shortage. That numbness your friend described, that's not just getting old. That is the nerves in her feet sending a distress signal because they aren't getting the steady stream of oxygen-rich blood they need to function properly. It's like a cell phone losing its signal. The connection becomes spotty, and eventually it just cuts out. It's a call for help, not a white flag of surrender.
It is a powerful image, the idea of a highway slowly being restricted, but I think what scares many of us is the why. We start to wonder if this is the beginning of a total breakdown. If we feel that heaviness or that strange coldness in our toes, even when the house is warm, what is the actual danger of just powering through it? We come from a generation that was taught to not complain, to just keep moving. If we ignore these letters our body is sending us, as you put it, what are we really risking? Is it just a matter of discomfort? Or are we looking at a loss of independence, the fear that one day we might not be able to walk to the mailbox or play with our grandchildren in the yard because we waited too long to listen?
That fear of losing independence is perhaps the most significant silent symptom of all, Jane. And you're right to highlight it. When we ignore these early signs, the cramping when we walk a block or two, the skin on our legs changing color slightly, or that persistent coldness. We aren't just ignoring a minor annoyance. We might be overlooking peripheral artery disease or PAD. This happens when plaque builds up in the arteries that carry blood to your legs. If we let it progress, it doesn't just stay as a tingle. It can lead to claudication, which is that specific pain in the calves that hits you when you're active and only goes away when you stop to rest. It's your muscles literally screaming because they are starving for oxygen. If the blood flow continues to drop, the skin becomes fragile. A tiny scratch from a gardening tool or a blister from a shoe can turn into a wound that refuses to heal because there isn't enough blood flow to provide the construction materials for repair. This is where the risk of infection or even more serious complications becomes very real. But I want to be clear. The goal of our talk today isn't to cause alarm. It's to empower. If we catch these signs early, there are so many things we can do through nutrition, simple movement, and working with a doctor to keep those highways open. We aren't just talking about fixing a leg. We are talking about preserving your ability to move through the world on your own terms.
That is a relief to hear that it's not an inevitable slide downward. I want to hold on to that word empower because if we can recognize the sequence, the order in which these signs appear, maybe we can catch the problem while it's still just a whisper. You've mentioned that there are 5 specific signals we should look for, and also some very accessible vitamins, things many of us might already have in our kitchens, that can support this vital circulation. I want to go through those, but I think it's important for our listeners to understand that while we are sharing this information, it's a tool to help them talk to their own doctors, not a replacement for that professional checkup. So, where does it start, Sanjay? If we were to look at the very first chapter of this letter from our body, what is the first thing that usually changes?
You've hit on the perfect starting point, Jane. The very first chapter often feels so mundane that we miss it. It's usually a change in temperature or a subtle change in sensation. It starts with your feet feeling unusually cold, even when you're tucked under a blanket, or perhaps it's that pins and needles feeling that doesn't go away after you shift your position. We're going to walk through these 5 stages today, from the mildest to the more urgent, and we'll talk about those 4 key vitamins like vitamin C, E, K, and B3 that act as the maintenance crew for your blood vessels. But as you wisely said, the most important step is observation. If you notice these things happening consistently, you aren't being difficult or complaining by bringing it up to your doctor. You are being a diligent caretaker of the only body you have. Let's look at these signs together so no one has to feel like they are losing their freedom just because they didn't know how to read the map.
It is heartbreaking to think about how our world starts to shrink when we stop trusting our own legs to carry us, Dr. Gupta. I often hear from folks who say they have started avoiding the grocery store or the park, not because they don't want to go, but because they are terrified of that moment when their legs simply refuse to move forward. They describe this heavy, crushing sensation in their calves that forces them to stop right in their tracks, often pretending to look at a shelf or tie a shoe just to hide their pain from strangers. Is this kind of physical limitation just a natural consequence of the muscles getting older and losing their former strength? Or are we looking at a much more specific biological protest where the body is literally gasping for air in the most remote parts of our anatomy?
You have captured that feeling of shrinking horizons perfectly, Jane. And it reminds me so vividly of a gentleman I met recently named Robert Miller. Robert is 68 years old and lives in Tampa, Florida, a man who always prided himself on his independence and his daily walks through the local markets. He told me with such a heavy heart about how he found himself standing in the middle of a supermarket aisle, leaning heavily against a shelf of canned goods, not because he was browsing, but because his calves felt like they were being squeezed in a vice. Robert thought he was just out of shape or perhaps lacking some calcium, but what he was actually experiencing was a classic case of claudication. When Robert walked, his leg muscles demanded more oxygen-rich blood to keep moving, but because his arteries had narrowed over the years, the supply couldn't meet the demand. It is a terrifying realization for a man like Robert to feel that his body is failing him in such a public way, especially when the pain only subsides when he stops moving, creating this stop-and-go existence that eventually makes a person want to just stay home.
That stop-and-go existence sounds like a prison sentence for someone who has spent their whole life being active and involved in their community. It is so easy for someone in Robert's position to fall into a cycle of despair, thinking that if it hurts to walk, the solution is simply to walk less. which we know can often lead to even worse health outcomes. When a patient like Robert comes to you with these symptoms, how do you help them distinguish between a simple muscle cramp and this more serious internal blockage? And more importantly, how do we convince someone that pushing through the pain might actually be dangerous if they don't understand that their muscles are literally starving for the fuel they need to survive?
That is the crucial question, Jane, because Robert was exactly the type of person who tried to push through it, believing that no pain, no gain still applied at 68. I had to explain to him that a normal muscle cramp or a Charlie horse usually happens at rest or during a sudden movement, but his pain was predictable, it was rhythmic, appearing only after a certain distance of walking. I told him to imagine his leg muscles as a high-performance engine. If you restrict the fuel line, the engine will sputter and stall every time you try to accelerate. For Robert, the danger of ignoring this wasn't just the pain itself, but the fact that poor circulation means even a tiny blister or a small cut on his foot could become a major medical crisis. Because there isn't enough blood reaching the area to fight infection or knit the tissue back together, a simple sore can turn into a chronic ulcer. I encouraged Robert to start a journal, noting exactly how many minutes he could walk before the pain started and describing the sensation in detail, whether it was coldness, numbness, or that heavy, leaden feeling. By doing this, Robert stopped feeling like a victim of old age and started becoming an active observer of his own health, which is the first step toward reclaiming that lost freedom.
We often believe we are doing everything right by sticking to the classic senior diet of oatmeal, dry toast, and perhaps a cup of tea, thinking that by avoiding fats and heavy meats, we are keeping our hearts and vessels safe. But I wonder if this restricted way of eating is actually leaving out the very building blocks our vascular system needs to stay flexible and resilient. It seems there is a hidden gap between not eating bad things and actively eating the right things. Could it be that our well-intentioned breakfasts are actually leaving our arteries brittle and unable to handle the pressure of our daily lives? And what are those specific nutrients that we might be missing even when we think our plates are healthy?
You've touched on a very subtle but dangerous trap, Jane, where we focus so much on what to subtract from our diet that we forget what we must add to maintain the structural integrity of our bodies. I see many patients who are very disciplined about avoiding salt and grease, yet their skin is thin, their bruises stay for weeks, and their circulation is sluggish. I often explain to them that our blood vessels aren't just static pipes. They are living, breathing tissues that require constant repair, and one of the most vital workers in that repair crew is vitamin C. Most people think of vitamin C only when they have a cold, but it is actually essential for the production of collagen, which is the glue that keeps our artery walls strong and elastic. Without enough of it, those pipes become fragile and prone to damage. I tell my patients that while a bowl of plain porridge is fine, it doesn't provide the antioxidant shield that a handful of fresh berries or some sliced bell peppers would offer. These antioxidants are like a protective coating that prevents cholesterol from becoming sticky and damaging the lining of the vessels.
It is fascinating to think of vitamin C as a construction worker for our arteries rather than just a boost for the immune system. But I think there is a lot of confusion out there, especially with the marketing of supplements, where people think they can just pop a high-dose pill and fix everything overnight. For our listeners who are sitting at their breakfast tables right now, how do we find that balance between getting enough nutrients and overdoing it? And why is it so much better to get these vitamins from the vibrant colors of real food rather than a bottle on the shelf, especially when we are managing other medications like blood pressure pills or cholesterol statins?
That balance is everything, Jane, because more is not always better when it comes to the delicate chemistry of a body over 60. When you eat a red bell pepper, a kiwi, or a serving of broccoli, you aren't just getting vitamin C, you are getting a complex symphony of phytonutrients and fiber that help the vitamin work more effectively and safely. I always caution my patients that taking massive doses of isolated vitamins in pill form can sometimes interfere with their regular medications or even cause unwanted side effects like digestive upset or kidney stones. The goal should be food first. I encourage people to look at their plate and ask if it looks like a rainbow. If your breakfast is entirely white and beige, you are missing out on the fuel your vascular system needs to stay supple. We want those arteries to be like young willow branches that can bend in the wind, not like dry, brittle twigs that snap under pressure. By adding those fresh, colorful sources of vitamin C and other antioxidants, we are giving our circulation the best chance to keep those highways to our feet clear and functional for years to come.
There is a certain kind of quiet shame that many women and even men carry as they age, especially when it comes to the appearance of their legs. They see those dark, twisted veins or the swelling that makes their ankles disappear by the end of the day, and they simply hide them under long pants or heavy stockings, thinking it is just a cosmetic price they have to pay for the years. But I suspect that what we dismiss as ugly might actually be a visible map of a struggle happening deep within the veins. When does a concern for how our legs look cross the line into a serious medical warning that we can no longer afford to ignore?
That sense of hiding away is something I saw very clearly in a patient of mine named Patricia Johnson, or Pat, as she liked to be called. Pat is 74 years old and lives in Cleveland, Ohio, and for years she had stopped wearing her favorite dresses or going to the community pool because she was embarrassed by the ropey blue veins bulging on her calves. She told me she thought it was just her reward for a lifetime of standing as a teacher. But what she didn't realize was that those veins were a sign that the tiny valves inside her legs were failing. When those valves weaken, blood doesn't move upward toward the heart as it should. Instead, it pools in the lower legs, creating pressure, swelling, and that heavy aching sensation that Pat had been stoically enduring. For Pat, it wasn't just about the look of her legs, it was about the fact that her circulation was fighting a losing battle against gravity every single day.
It is so common for people to be stoic, as you said, especially a teacher like Pat, who is used to putting everyone else's needs first. But that pooling of blood sounds like it could lead to much more than just a bit of swelling. If someone like Pat continues to just cover it up and wait, what is the progression of that condition? Is there a point where those tired veins become a risk for something more sudden or life-threatening? And what are the specific red flags that should make someone stop worrying about the aesthetics and start calling their doctor for a real evaluation?
You're absolutely right, Jane. The stoic approach can be very dangerous here because untreated venous insufficiency doesn't just stay the same, it gets worse. For Pat, the turning point came when her ankles started to turn a brownish, rusty color and the skin became itchy and tight. I had to explain to her that this wasn't just a skin rash, it was iron from the pooled blood actually leaking into her tissues, which can eventually lead to painful skin ulcers that are incredibly difficult to heal. The red flags everyone should watch for are persistent swelling that doesn't go away overnight, a feeling of restless legs that keeps you up at night, or any area of the skin that feels warm, red, or tender to the touch, which could signal a blood clot. I told Pat that her legs were like a drainage system that had become backed up. If we didn't clear the path and support the flow, the whole system would eventually suffer. We worked on simple things like elevating her legs above her heart several times a day and using medical-grade compression, which helped her regain not just the health of her legs, but the confidence to stop hiding and start living again.
It seems like our bodies are trying to tell us a story in chapters, Dr. Gupta, but we often don't start paying attention until the plot becomes a crisis. If we could look at the timeline of declining circulation, it would be so helpful to know which signs are the early whispers and which ones are the urgent warnings. Many of our listeners might have one or two of these symptoms and think they are unrelated, like a cold foot or a midnight cramp. Can we lay out that order of operations for them so they can see where they might be on this spectrum and understand when the situation has moved from keep an eye on it to we need to take action now?
That story in chapters is a perfect way to describe it, Jane, because there truly is a progressive nature to how these symptoms appear. It usually starts with something very subtle, like a change in skin color. Perhaps your feet look a bit pale or have a bluish tint when you're sitting still. Then comes the second chapter, which is often the cramping, either that window shopper's pain in the calves during a walk or those sudden sharp cramps that wake you up in the middle of the night. The third sign is often a persistent tingling or pins and needles sensation, which tells us the nerves are beginning to suffer from the lack of blood flow. As things progress to the fourth stage, you'll notice the temperature drop. Your feet feel like ice even in a warm room because the internal heater of your blood flow isn't reaching the extremities. And the fifth sign, as we saw with Pat, is the visible change in the veins or the skin texture itself becoming thin, shiny, or discolored.
When you lay it out like that, It feels much less like a collection of random aches and much more like a clear signal. I'm particularly struck by that icy foot symptom because so many seniors just reach for an extra pair of wool socks and call it a day. But if the blood isn't getting there to provide heat, then a sock is really just insulating the cold, isn't it? At what point do these 5 signs converge into what doctors call a critical stage? If someone is experiencing 3 or 4 of these symptoms together, what does that mean for their overall cardiovascular health? And is there still a way to turn the car around before the road ends?
You've hit on a vital point about the socks, Jane. You can't insulate what isn't being heated from the inside. When these signs start to cluster, when you have the coldness, the pain when walking, and perhaps a small sore that just won't scab over, that is when we move into the territory of peripheral artery disease that needs immediate professional intervention. It suggests that the blockages aren't just in one small spot, but are significant enough to affect the whole limb's survival. However, the message I want everyone to hear is one of hope. The body is remarkably resilient. Even when the main highway is narrowed, we can often encourage the growth of back roads or collateral circulation through guided exercise and the right nutritional support. But the key is not to wait for the final chapter. If you are in those early stages of tingling or occasional cramping, that is the golden window to make changes that can prevent the more serious stages from ever developing. Listening to those early chapters is the best way to ensure your life story keeps moving forward with strength and mobility.
I think about the many ways we find excuses for our discomfort, Dr. Gupta. We blame the air conditioning, we blame the shoes we wore 20 years ago, or we blame the way we sat on the sofa. There is a generation of people who are masters at making excuses, so they don't have to face the idea that their body might be changing. But when that coldness or that numbness becomes a constant companion, it moves beyond an excuse and becomes a thief of our stability. How does this loss of sensation in the feet actually lead to something even more frightening for an older person, like the loss of balance or the sudden devastating fall that changes everything?
That connection between sensation and safety is so critical, Jane, and it makes me think of Evelyn Carter. Evelyn is 81 and lives in Phoenix, Arizona, a place where it is rarely cold. Yet she was wearing heavy slippers all day long because her feet felt like blocks of ice. She told me she just thought she was becoming thin-blooded as she got older, but she also admitted she had started stumbling more often and felt wobbly on her feet. I explained to Evelyn that our feet are actually sophisticated sensory organs. They tell our brain exactly where we are in space and what the ground feels like beneath us. When your circulation is poor, the nerves in your feet start to go quiet, a condition we call peripheral neuropathy. If Evelyn can't feel the floor properly because her feet are numb or cold, her brain isn't getting the data it needs to keep her balanced. For an 81-year-old, a loss of feeling isn't just an inconvenience, it's a major fall risk.
It is terrifying to realize that Evelyn's cold feet were actually a warning that she was losing her GPS for the ground. It makes so much sense. If you can't feel the floor, you can't stay upright. For someone like Evelyn, or for our listeners who might be feeling that same wobbliness, what are the simple ways they can check themselves at home? We don't want people to panic, but we do want them to be observant. Is there a way to test if the signals are still getting through, and what should they do if they realize their feet aren't as talkative to their brain as they used to be?
I always tell my patients that being a body detective is a great way to stay safe. A simple check is to look at your feet in good light every night. Check the color. Are they pale or do they turn a deep red or purple when they hang down? Feel the temperature of both feet. Is one significantly colder than the other? You can even do a simple touch test where you have a family member lightly touch your toes while your eyes are closed to see if you can accurately identify which toe is being touched. For Evelyn, the realization that her stumbling was linked to her circulation was a wake-up call. I told her that she needed to see a specialist to check the pulses in her feet and perhaps get an ultrasound to see how the blood was flowing. The goal is to catch this before a fall happens. By improving that flow, sometimes through medication, sometimes through simple foot exercises, we can often wake up those nerves and give someone like Evelyn her balance and her confidence back. It's about keeping you connected to the earth you walk on.
We are constantly bombarded with labels that say low fat, heart healthy, or natural, And it is so easy to fall into the habit of grabbing those processed snacks thinking we are making a safe choice. We might have given up the bacon and eggs, but replaced them with a healthy granola bar or a sweet tea that is actually loaded with hidden sugars and preservatives. I suspect these modern convenience foods are doing a different kind of damage to our circulation than the old-fashioned fats did. How do these high-sugar, highly processed foods affect the delicate lining of our arteries? And why is it that we need to be especially careful about things like vitamin K when we are trying to manage our blood's ability to flow?
You've hit on a modern health paradox, Jane. We've traded traditional fats for refined sugars and chemical additives, and our blood vessels are paying the price. When we consume those low-fat but high-sugar snacks, our blood sugar spikes, which causes inflammation in the endothelial lining, the very inner skin of our blood vessels. Think of it like pouring sandpaper through a delicate silk tube. Over time, that inflammation makes the walls of the vessels scarred and stiff. And when it comes to vitamin K, which is found in those wonderful leafy greens like spinach and kale, things get even more complex for our seniors. Vitamin K is essential for healthy blood clotting and bone health, but many people are told to avoid it entirely if they are on blood thinners like warfarin. This often leads to people cutting out the very vegetables that could help keep their vascular system stable, which is a huge misunderstanding of how the body works.
That misunderstanding sounds like it could be a real health trap. If someone is told, watch your greens because of their medication, they might end up with a diet that is totally devoid of the nutrients that keep their vessels from becoming brittle. It's a delicate dance, isn't it? How do we advise our listeners to navigate this? Is it about avoiding these foods entirely, or is there a way to eat those life-giving greens safely so they can get the benefits of vitamin K without throwing their medication out of balance? And what about those hidden sugars in our tea and snacks? How do we find the motivation to choose a piece of fruit over a healthy packaged bar? Hey.
It truly is a dance, Jane, and the key word is consistency, not avoidance. For vitamin K, the most important thing for someone on blood thinners is to keep their intake consistent every day so their doctor can adjust the medication dose to match their lifestyle. If you suddenly go from eating no greens to a giant bowl of spinach, that's a problem. But if you have a small, steady amount every day, your body and your medication can find a rhythm. As for the snacks, I try to help my patients see that those processed bars are dead food. They don't offer the living enzymes and vitamins that a simple apple or a handful of walnuts provide. I tell them to think of their circulation as a river. Sugar makes that river thick and sluggish, while fresh, whole foods keep it clear and vibrant. We want to nourish the vessels, not just fill the stomach. By choosing real whole foods, you are giving your body the vitamin K it needs for stability and avoiding the inflammatory sandpaper of processed sugars.
I often think about the incredible resilience of the human spirit, especially when I hear about people in their late 80s or 90s who are still finding ways to improve their health. It is so easy to think that at 89, the die is cast and there is no point in trying to change old habits. But I've seen how even the smallest shifts in how we move or what we eat can ripple through the body and create a sense of renewed energy. What does it look like when someone at that grand age decides to stop accepting tired legs as a final answer? And what are the simple, everyday changes that can actually make a difference in how the blood moves through those long-traveled pathways?
George Walker is the absolute embodiment of that resilience, Jane. George is 89 years old, living in Portland, Oregon, and he came to me complaining of legs that felt heavy as logs and skin that was starting to look bruised and mottled. He was sleeping poorly because of cramps and was honestly becoming afraid to stand up too quickly at night for fear of his legs giving out. George thought he was just at the end of his rope, but we focused on just two very simple changes. First, we implemented movement snacks. Instead of sitting for hours in his armchair, he agreed to stand up and walk just a few laps around his living room every hour and to do simple ankle pumps while he was sitting. Second, we looked at his intake of vitamin E, which is a powerful antioxidant that helps protect the fatty membranes of our cells from damage.
Movement snacks. I love that term. It makes exercise feel so much more approachable than the idea of a workout. And vitamin E is something we often associate with skin creams, but hearing about it as a protector for our internal cells is a new perspective. For someone like George, were these changes difficult to maintain? And how quickly did his body respond to this new attention? It must be so rewarding for someone of his age to realize that they still have the power to influence how they feel every morning when they wake up.
George was amazed at how quickly things started to shift. By simply moving his ankles and taking those short walks, he was helping his calf muscles act as a second heart, pumping that pooled blood back up toward his chest. And by adding vitamin E-rich foods like sunflower seeds, almonds, and a little bit of avocado to his meals, he was giving his blood vessels an extra layer of defense against oxidative stress. Within just a few weeks, he told me the log-like feeling in his legs had lightened, and the nighttime cramps were becoming less frequent. He felt like he had been given a tune-up. I told George that his body didn't need a miracle, it just needed a little bit of help with the logistics of flow. It's a powerful reminder for all of us. Whether you are 60 or 89, your body is still listening, and it is still capable of responding to kindness and better choices. George isn't just surviving his 80s now, he's moving through them with a lot more ease and a lot less fear.
We have covered so much ground today, from the early whispers of numbness to the visible signs of tired veins, and we've talked about these 4 powerful allies, vitamins B3, C, K, and E. It is tempting for anyone listening to want to run to the pharmacy and grab 4 bottles of supplements to fix their circulation by tomorrow morning. But I know you have a strong caution about this, Dr. Gupta. There is a world of difference between a vitamin that comes wrapped in the fiber of a vegetable and a high-dose synthetic pill that might interact with a dozen other things in an older person's medicine cabinet. How do we approach these 4 golden vitamins with wisdom rather than just a more is better mentality?
That is the most important prescription I can give today, Jane. Do not turn your kitchen into a pharmacy. Take vitamin B3 or niacin, for example. It is famous for its ability to help dilate blood vessels and improve cholesterol profiles, which sounds like exactly what someone with poor circulation needs. However, in high doses as a supplement, niacin can cause intense skin flushing, liver issues, or interfere with diabetes medications. It is a powerful tool, but it's one that should be managed by a doctor, not self-prescribed from a bottle. I always tell my patients that the safest and most effective way to get these benefits is through a food-first approach. When you get your B3 from turkey, fish, or legumes, your body absorbs it at a natural pace that it can actually handle.
It sounds like we need to treat vitamins with the same respect we treat any other medicine. It's a bit of a shift in thinking because we've been told for so long that vitamins are just natural and therefore harmless. But for our audience, many of whom are managing multiple health conditions, that natural label can be misleading if it leads to an overdose. If someone is truly concerned about their circulation and wants to use these 4 vitamins to help, what is the best way for them to start that conversation with their doctor? How do they ask for a personalized plan rather than just a general recommendation that might not fit their specific body?
The best way is to go in with your body journal and a list of all your current medications. Say to your doctor, I've been noticing some numbness and coldness in my feet, and I've been reading about how vitamin C, E, K, and B3 support circulation. Based on my heart health and my current medications, what is the safest way for me to optimize these nutrients? This shows your doctor that you are informed but also cautious. Remember, vitamin K can change how your blood thinners work, and vitamin E in high doses can actually increase the risk of bleeding if you're on certain medications. The goal isn't to take a handful of pills. It's to create a landscape in your body where blood can flow freely and safely. By focusing on a diverse, colorful diet and moving your body, you are getting those vitamins in their most bioavailable and safest forms. We want to support the highway, not cause a chemical pileup in the system.
As we draw this conversation to a close, I find myself thinking about what we all truly want as we age. It isn't just about living longer, it is about living better. It is about the dignity of being able to walk to our neighbor's house, the joy of standing in the kitchen to cook a family meal, and the peace of mind that comes from knowing our bodies aren't a ticking time bomb of old age symptoms. You've given us such a clear map today, Dr. Gupta. reminding us that those tingles and cold toes aren't just a tax on aging, but a call to action. If you could leave our listeners with a final thought, a way to carry this hope into their lives starting tomorrow, what would that be?
My final message is that your circulation is the lifeblood of your independence. When we take care of our blood vessels, we are protecting our dignity of movement. I want everyone to remember three simple things. First, don't ignore the whispers. If your feet are cold, numb, or cramping when you walk, that is your body asking for help. Listen to it and talk to your doctor early. Second, eat for your arteries. Bring those 4 colors to your plate every day. The greens for vitamin K, the citrus and peppers for vitamin C, the nuts and seeds for vitamin E, and the healthy proteins for B3. And third, keep the water moving. Just as a stagnant pond becomes cloudy, stagnant blood leads to trouble. Move your ankles, take your movement snacks, and stay hydrated. It has been such an honor to share these stories with you, Jane. Thank you for giving a voice to these concerns that so many people carry in silence. To everyone listening, your health is a journey of small steps, and every step you take to improve your circulation is a step toward a more vibrant, independent future.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta. You've turned what could have been a frightening medical topic into a beautiful story of hope and practical action. I feel like I've learned to listen to my own body a little bit better today, and I hope our listeners feel the same. To everyone at home, remember that you are the best advocate for your own health. Don't wait for the shout when you can act on the whisper today. We are so grateful you chose to spend this time with us on Healthy Kidneys After 60. If this conversation touched you or helped you understand your body better, please consider subscribing to our podcast and sharing it with a friend who might need to hear this message. We have many more stories to tell and more experts like Dr. Gupta to help us navigate these golden years with grace and strength. Until next time, I'm Jane Pauley. Take care of yourselves and keep those highways moving. Good night.